Thousands of authors have made the jump to self-publishing. Now you can take control of your own destiny and get your book published today with help from self-publishing experts Adam Stempel and Chris Wallace on the Written Well podcast.
Welcome to episode 8 of the Written Well podcast. It kind of feels like that's a real number, like we're really doing this thing, right?
Agreed.
Cool. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about, and we're going to show people what our different perspectives are. I'm going to talk about why all of the ways that you're supposed to write a book are wrong,
and I'm going to tell you how they are also right.
And if you need to know anything about the two of us, now you know it.
This is our relationship in a nutshell. I was so happy you had an ally a few podcasts ago with Blaze Ward, telling you like, no, everything Adam told you is wrong. I'm like, awesome, because it proves my point about there's no wrong way to write. There's only how you write. There's no one can teach you how to write. You have to learn how you write. So even when I'm wrong, I'm right, I think is what I'm saying.
That's not surprising that that's your view.
That's my takeaway.
So we're going to cover all of these ways that people will tell you this is how you write a book, this is how you write a bestseller, this is and I'm going to show you examples of why that isn't true necessarily all the time. But in most cases you're going to be right that there's a lot we can learn from these things. That's why I know what they all are, because I have been learning from them.
Yep.
But in each one I think about there's a book I really love that isn't like this at all. Let's start with Save the Cat. Are you familiar with Save the Cat?
I'm unfamiliar with Save the Cat. You are far more familiar with the story structures, though. I've been doing so much research on them. I'm fascinated by them, but I have never once used one in my work. But I'm sure you can look at my books and apply one of them to them and be like, oh, here, Stempel has used a classic 3-act structure here with his novel. And I'd be like, yes, I did.
Yes. And that is what a lot of these people do. They just take any old book and they show you how it could apply to that. You can, and in fact, like many of them do, but that's just not how it really works. So
that's when I'm writing anything about writing, it's very funny because I inevitably use my own writing to illustrate the examples I'm talking about. And it's not because I don't think I'm the greatest writer, and because I think I'm the greatest writer in the world, because I don't think I'm the greatest writer in the world, but I'm very familiar with my own work, so I can find examples in it very easily. And I can, with complete and utter confidence, tell you what the author was trying to do with this passage, which you can't do with any other writers, though many people will tell you what a writer was trying to do with a passage. And often if you actually find the writer and ask them, they'll like, no, I made the curtains blue, not because it was a symbol of the main character's sadness. It was because I thought they would look nice blue and they needed a color. So Save the Cat.
So a guy named Blake Snyder, who was a Hollywood screenwriter, wrote a bunch of stuff, was fairly successful, broke Hollywood screenwriting into here are the 15 beats that a movie must have to be successful. And the Save the Cat portion is how it refers to getting your hero to be beloved by your audience by having them do some sort of heroic thing that's very small at the beginning, like saving a cat. I don't like cats, so that doesn't work for me. But if he could save a dog in my story, it'd be fine. And it's then it became a popular thing in Hollywood screenwriting, and then it became a whole. He created a whole business around it, and now he sells the books and it goes. He's got a version for novels and a version for screenplays and a version for theater and all these different different versions, and it's a straight 15 acts. There are lots of places that will sell you Save the Cat beat sheets, um, and they start with an opening image as the one beat one, and then the theme stated, and so it comes in and gives you the central theme of the story, and then there's a setup. The hero and the ordinary world are introduced, and some of this follows the hero's journey, which we're going to talk about as well.
Oh, for sure.
Because there is the hero hesitant to take action, and then the hero taking the challenge. But because it's a film thing, there's a subplot. Same thing with almost all television shows these days, fiction television. It's all got, you have to figure out where the subplots have to be and how they have to work, and they're plotted out minute by minute. So in Beat 7, the subplot kicks in, and that introduces a character who helps the hero in their transformation. And
the mentor, that's from the hero's journey too.
Yeah. And so my issue with Save the Cat is not that it's wrong, but that it is sold as this is how this must be. And there are many, many things that don't follow this. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark follows almost none of this stuff. And you're not going to,
tell me the cat that Snake Plissken saves in Escape from New York.
or Rocky. Rocky doesn't save a cat either, and he's a beloved hero. He's so beloved that after the good first movie, they made 8 shitty ones, and people watched all of them. You can take any of these like iconic movies, and you will find at least 1 or 2 of these beats are not there. And when you sell this thing to people as this is how it's done as a formula, you convince people that they must put all these things in, and then you take away some creativity there, I think, because you need to know that the rules can be broken, and that's, I think, what people forget when they talk about Save the Cat.
100%. I mean, I opened this podcast with, you can't learn how to write, you need to learn how you write. I mean, there's a lot to be learned from these structures, and I've found my critiquing the last couple of weeks while I'm doing all this work on story structures has been very much like, look, this plot point was just given to the main character without them earning it. You really have to make them discover it. And that's straight out of, there are some things that really, really work, and a lot of this stuff, you can use stuff in it. I've used the hero's journey a bunch of times, but usually just picking and choosing the stuff I want out of it. I've never plotted something according to it, but I've used some of the things. What's utile about these structures is and the reason they're advertised as the template is that they're based on movies, books, stories that have really resonated with people. Campbell's the Adventures of the Hero, which the hero's journey was based on. I mean, that's based on his work of 1,000-year-old tales that are still around and being told. The Save the Cat, based on hit movies, okay, that millions of people have adored. So they're trying to find and quantify what is in these pieces of fiction that resonates with people. So what are the plot points? What are the characters that are more than characters? They're Jungian archetypes that cross boundaries, and every human feels deeply connected to these characters. But they're not infallible, and you can do around it. But it is, I always like to look at these things and figure out what they're trying to get to. And that's what they're trying to get to, is this kind of eternal resonance that you want in your fiction, so that it beats in the heart of everyone who consumes it, not just fans of the genre, not just fans of you, but anyone who gets a look at it. There's this special something in it. And when you can find those pieces, because those pieces exist in all these different little structures, and so find those and see how you can adapt them to your own stories. Or if your story is done but it's missing something, look at these structures, and then look also at what they're based on. The folk tales of that Campbell's using, the hit movies that this guy's using, the other stuff. Look at the source material as well, and figure out for yourself what's resonating in those that's missing from your work, and put it in there. Remember, the hero's journey was not originally supposed to be he didn't write it to be followed as a story structure. In his original, Vogler was the guy who did it. In his original memo, it was for the producers and the directors to use this structure to fix scripts that had been sent to them. So it's really to be applied and go, okay, I've got this great story, but it's not quite working. What's it missing? What of these pieces could I put in there that'll make it take off? Is the hero not refusing the call? Is the hero not being transformed? Often it's that transformation that people are missing.
And Campbell's, in high school a long time ago, I read a bunch of Campbell's stuff, and he's really talking about the history of myth. Yeah. He's not talking about this is how you write. He's talking about, if we look at myths, these are patterns we find from myths throughout history, and why. He talks about culture and why the cultures developed these things. He's not trying to teach people to write, even when he comes out with that stuff too.
That's why we look at the hero's journey. And when I was writing about the hero's journey with fantasy stuff, I did the hero's journey from Vogler, but I also added in a bunch of stuff from Campbell, because fantasy is you can get a lot closer to these myths and myth-making stuff. You're usually if you're not dealing with prehistory, you're dealing with magic and magical thinking, which is a lot of the very old tales. So it's, so I was adding some of that stuff in, because the fun thing about fantasy is you can take these metaphors and make them actually real.
Let's talk about the numbered. There's lots of numbered methods. So we'll go to the 3-9-27 thing, but let's start with the 7-point story structure, which is a big one, right. Especially for young adult stuff. For some reason, they talk about the 7-point, and that starts with a hook, and then goes plot point, pinch point, midpoint, pinch point, and then a plot and a resolution as a climax at the end. So it's so basic that you can apply it very easily. All it's really telling you is that you have to have a couple times when it's hard for your hero to do things. That's kind of it. And that is a thing that's consistent through many of these stories, right? That even in something as simple as the 19-minute sitcom thing, there's always you think you got the problem solved, but you don't, and things are worse. And then you think you got the problem solved, but you don't, and then you get it solved. That is a real thing that's in many, many stories, but it doesn't have to be. Again, Rocky it's not there.
What I find interesting about all of this is that, and I've certainly been guilty of this myself, is the snap judgment of these story structures is always, this story structure, this formula is a formulaic way of looking at stuff. It's for small minds to look at this, who can't just conceive a greater story and blaze their own way. And it took me a while to get over that, because it's not true. And if you look at a lot of them, a lot of them are all describing the same thing, which is basically, the hero needs to try a couple of times before it happens. And like I said, I think they're very useful, except when you try to apply them as they say you should apply them, which is directly. Yeah. But
my only problem with them is when they're sold as things that must be done exactly this way, because I think then you're really steering people the wrong direction. But that is the way to sell these things.
Yeah,
and you hear about these things because people are trying to sell them.
There's a long way between sales and application.
That's right.
But the interesting thing about that, the 7-point one, you said very simple, and you said it applies a lot to young adult, and I think a lot of the time, and this is a broad This is painting an entire genre with a broad brush. But often young adult readers, and especially as they get younger, are more plot oriented. So it's very useful to have very serious plot points, and be very plot oriented and make sure your plot is all good. Because when a kid tells you what a book is about, they tell you what happens in the book. That's the plot. When an adult tells you what the book is about, they tell you about the characters in the book. And that's why you switch as you get
So
older.
that's a lot of insight for anybody who's thinking about writing young adult. That's something I didn't know, would never thought about.
Yeah, I've heard that from several writers, and I agreed. I've written a bunch of young adult, both middle grade, older young adult, picture books. And it's not that you don't do character development, but if your plot is not moving along, your younger readers are gonna drift off to some other activity.
That is interesting.
But so that makes those very strict plot point structures very very attractive to YA, creating YA. I mean, you wouldn't want to use the hero's journey necessarily for a YA book. And one of the things I love about the hero's journey, again, not really having used it fully, but pulled pieces from it. One of the things about it that's great is it covers both plot and character development in its steps. I mean, so it's very, very much about, not just the hero physically moving through the journey, which it does, but also the it's big points of death and rebirth, either metaphorically or, once again, in fantasy, it could be literal. Their death and rebirth could be literal.
That's also, I always, when we're doing the craft stuff, try to make sure that there's a thread of publishing going through, these conversations. And what we're talking about here is not just we're talking about story, but we're talking about how to write things, how to learn to write things, how to figure out writing things. And a lot of these things that we're talking about will help you get a structure to get started, get rolling, fill in, whatever. There are some people, Blaze might be one of them, who just have a structure and fill it in every time and do it over and over and over and over. And people
love
it.
It was, and it was a simple one, and it also works. He's like, you set up, you have the setup, you get your character, you get your setting, and then the character has a problem. He has a big problem. Along the way, he has little problems that he solves. Get little problems, solve it. Repeat until he solves the big problem. And how many problems he's going to solve is then how what the length is. He's like, one problem, that's a short story. 2 to 3 problems is a novelette. 4 or 5 problems is novella. Anything more, you got a novel. And it all works. And part of the publishing thing, why you would look at these things, is, again, because these structures are based on very popular works. No one's doing structures of, hey, these 2 niche novels that came out in the 18th century are just fantastic, but no one's read them. Here's their structure that you can use for your books. No one's doing that.
Yeah, the 19-beat German structure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's 1 beat, it's long, and nothing happens. But so looking at them, it can be useful for the saleable part of them. You want a saleable book. The other thing to remember is that a lot of these structures we talk about, because we're English speakers living in the West, are Western ones. There's been some fascinating movies coming out and books as well, using story structures from other cultures, which can be very different. And though the heroes, Campbell was going through a lot of other cultures, not just Western ones, he's still looking at it through a Western eye. It's like when Snorri Sturluson, I think was his name, he codified the Norse myths in the 13th century. He's where we get all the stories about Loki and Odin and everything we know about the Norse myths, because he finally wrote them down.
And his name was what?
Snorri Sturluson or something. I'm screwing it up, but it's something like that.
That's
He's
a great
Icelandic.
name. That's amazing.
He was Icelandic. Now here's the thing. He was writing them down, and by this point, Iceland and Scandinavia were Christian nations. So he's writing these pagan myths, but he's kind of also squishing them into a way that 13th century Christians would understand them. And also where 13th century Christians wouldn't burn them at the stake when he delivered these
because they did that a lot,
right? And for the 700,000, 11, however many years earlier, these were uncodified, these were oral traditions. There's just a lot of things going on. So Ari, my eldest kid, said to me the other day, we're talking about it was mostly the Catholic Church killing Catholics in medieval times in Europe. And I said, well, in their defense, there was like about 3,500 Catholic churches, different sects of the religion. It was not like, they were going after what they considered their own. My friend David Perry, the historian, always says, they talk about medieval Europe being Christian, and yes, it was primarily Christian, but there were thousands of different sects with wildly different tenets of the religion, and some of it was just nuts. So it's not like we think of the Catholic Church today as this one giant entity. I mean, there were two popes for a while. There's just madness going on.
Right. So let's go. We'll work our way up in complications. Start with the 3-act structure.
Right.
Setup, confrontation, resolution. Some kind of more writers who consider themselves classically trained writers who do the thing you're supposed to do will often, put together a 3-act structure. And I see structure. I think one of the reasons I'm critical of these things in a different way than you are is that I see structure kind of the way that you see plot and outline. It's a thing that that's in my head already, and I don't understand why people are talking about it. Like you kind of see plot that way. You start writing and the plot is there pretty much, right? And I don't understand. They go, oh, there's not, if you don't have the structure, you don't have these conflicts, or you don't have these things set up. And I go, oh, that's writing. How do you need someone to tell you about that stuff? And 3-act in particular is such a simplistic thing. A lot of interesting thing has been written about it, but it's so simplistic that it feels to me like, oh, you need to tell me that I need to start off my story and then tell my story and then finish it.
I think the 3-act has some important stuff in it. Instead, especially like plot point 2. Which, I mean, when you dive deeper into it, it really does a lot of the stuff I've read. Plot point 2 does a good job of explaining that this is the low point of the hero. This is where the hero thought they were about to win, and then really, were wrong about something or were betrayed, and have just had a really crushing defeat that they have to come back from, and it's at like the 2/3 point of the book, and it's or the movie or whatever. It's this spot. I think
this is something that is in almost all of these, which is one of the great things I learned from studying these, was like the common threads. And the common thread here is that the hero has to change his attitude and go from reactive to proactive. He has to and he hits a really hard time that causes this to happen. That's of a common thread. It's also a thing that you can find books that don't have this that are great, but generally, especially in necessarily in this spot in the book, but it is such a common thing throughout books. And that's that was a learning experience for me to realize how many books do follow that particular thing.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I am a big believer in making hard and fast rules for yourself. Very few of them, but I have a few hard and fast rules that I follow, and some of them are grammar based. Some of them are, I've got some grammar and usage stuff that I just do a certain way in all my books. Like I never say gotta. I always say got to. even if I'm going to read it as gotta, it's in dialogue, I'm just going to write it that way because I had to decide, or I was going to be deciding every time I got to or
Sure.
gotta for the rest of my life. And I'm like, at this
Yeah.
point, I was thinking, I'm going to write at least 3 or 4 novels. I'm up to 16 or 17 now. So I mean, I'm glad I did this. But another hard and fast rule for me is that if I have a viewpoint character, they must have something to do with the action in the book, in the final action, in the completion of the process. That doesn't mean they'll live to the end, but their death will certainly have some effect.
When you say viewpoint character, because you write many of your books in third person limited, and so
I do. I love third person limited. I will also, and I'll combine viewpoints as well. But if I have, and sometimes I'll start a viewpoint character without knowing what effect they're going to have, and I run the risk of them getting to the end and me not having found a use for them and having to cut out a third or a half of my book, which has not happened yet. But it's, but that's really, I mean, that's as close to a hard and fast rule for me. And, and another one is that the main character, the protagonist, must be transformed in some way by their journey. And that comes a lot from learning that Samuel Delany, famous science fiction writer, would do writing classes. And if he got a piece of work where the main character was unchanged at the end, his sole comment was to scrawl "who cares" on the first page. That was it. That's all you got. Because it's like the tennis player who wants to learn tennis and the coach keeps telling him, keep your eye on the ball, keep your eye on the ball. Finally, after 10 lessons, he says, well, all you tell me is keep your eye on the ball. When am I going to learn something else? And the coach says, if you don't keep your eye on the ball, nothing else matters.
Yeah.
As
soon as you keep your eye on the ball.
If your character doesn't change at all, why did we read this entire book? If they learn nothing, if nothing changed, and then again, there's books that break that, especially, one of the big satire comedic things is where the character bumbles through an entire adventure and is completely unchanged, but has triumphed anyway. That's a big part of comedic works. But it's funny because people know the trope or feel the trope of the character having to go through a change.
Yeah. And some of this all gets down to language and perspective, and like, did this really happen here? Do we think it's opinion stuff? But like in the sitcom model, the characters do this tiny change in each episode and then start a new episode unchanged.
Yep.
And that the return to exactly normal again and all crises is resolved and things have not changed is the hallmark of sitcoms. Yep. It's often the hallmark of novellas and series of novellas and things too. So, in some cases, even the character changing isn't, a certainty. But for me, I feel like if I've written a good story, it has affected my character in some way anyway, and I don't feel like I need to focus on how does my character change here. Whereas I'm sure there are writers who do need to think about that. Much in the way that I need to think about the pacing and, whether I'm getting ahead of myself or whatever, I think it's really important to figure out what it is you do already so that you're not wasting time on it.
Yeah.
So you can work on the things that you need to work on, The
most common comment I get in editorial letters is, whether they're trying to expand it, to lengthen, want me to lengthen it or want me to shorten it. What they often said, I get this a lot, and it's nice, but it can be problematic if I've written something like this latest one I'm trying to cut down that's half again as long as the stories are supposed to be. I'm trying to cut it down, but I get the comment, your pacing and your plotting is so tight, we don't know where to cut it, or I don't know how you're going to lengthen it, but try. So I do pacing and plotting very well, despite not concentrating on it at all.
Well, I think that's why you don't concentrate on it at all.
Yeah,
because you have it already.
And there's some things, music scenes and fight scenes, I'm very confident in. So I've been having some stories where I'm like, Geez, I'm feeling unsure. I should put in a music or a fight scene because you gain confidence. But my entire first novel I wrote on my own involved music magic because I knew that I'd have a bunch of music scenes. And at that point, I was a very young writer, but I knew I had such extensive knowledge of music that my music writing would be completely authentic and believable, and it would just work. And so I used that kind of as a crutch to get me over the hard parts. Was just, you know what, let's write a music scene.
Well, it was a very Adam Stemple book.
Yeah,
and that book is clearly you.
well, that's what my mother always said. No matter the subject matter or genre of your first novel, it's going to largely be autobiographical. You just can't help it.
It's
the first
I'm gonna
one.
have to try to not publish my first novel as my book about the serial killer that way.
But it's autobiographical for sure.
I don't want to give that away. Wouldn't make me a very good serial killer.
I had a serial killer story that I turned into my writers group, and I told them, now look, I just want to assure you, I am not a serial killer. And they said, we read the story, Adam. We don't believe you. The story's so creepy. It hasn't gotten published yet, and I'm of two minds with that because every time it gets rejected, I'm like, oh no, a rejection. And then I think, do I really want my name associated with a publication that would put out something so freaking disturbing? Not sure I want that.
I wouldn't want to be in any club that would have me.
Exactly. Yeah. Someone's finally going, we love it, we'll take it. And I'm like, well, thank you, but I withdraw my submission. I just want it accepted. I don't want anyone knowing that was in my mind.
You're now on the list of places I don't submit things to.
That's right.
You failed the test.
Bastards. I just had a couple people come up at a show and were like, hey, finished the second novel, finished Bad Company. I'm like, oh, that's great. I'm sorry for the gas station scene. They're like, yeah. I'm like, right after I wrote that scene, I went online and I said, well, I can't pretend that was not in my brain. I thought of that. And I told them, and also that's not that whole, it's a whole thing. And I didn't get that from research. That's not anything that ever happened. I thought of that all on my own. So that's unfortunate. And if you read the book, you will know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes, and you'll go, oh yeah, Adam's not okay.
Yeah. And there's one or two of those in most of your books. And that one's a little special, but they're mostly in there.
My kid has come up to me on multiple occasions after reading some of my work, and come in and just go, you okay, buddy?
Let's look at this is my favorite one to criticize and also to use.
Excellent.
The 27 chapter thing.
Oh, right.
People have taken the 3-act, turned it into the 9 beats and but then they broke it into 27 chapters and said, this is what every chapter needs to do.
I got to
tell you. So you can get yourself a spreadsheet and you can see exactly what each chapter needs to do. And you can make your book fit this thing. And it gives you an outline to fill in. It's so dumb. And it also has been really valuable for me to play around.
I use it. Next question. I will not be taking questions at this time.
I always miss at least one of them. And there's always at least one of them where I go, this is stupid. I'm not doing that. This doesn't need to be here. Why do I use this dumb thing? But I have, I've literally outlined books using it and filling in a spreadsheet just to see what that would do. And some of them have become things I used. It can be valuable, but it's also just much too rigid. And so you can't, you have to be willing to color outside the lines if you're going to use this particular structure.
I like that you've now complained that things are too simple and then jumped right to it's too complicated.
That's right. None of them are making my life super easy.
There's no porridge was just right for you, Goldilocks is there.
They're all hard. I don't like any of them.
I look at it this way. I mean, everyone is looking for data points. Everyone's looking to quantify and codify the process. And frankly, the writing process is very difficult to do that for. It's not poker. It's not chess. It's not, you cannot track every potential part of it, and there's going to be exceptions to every rule. But I do kind of like reading about the attempts. I'm loving researching these things, and there's something to be learned from all of them. I can pretty much assure you that I will never use one to write a book, stem to stern, but I will look at them and adapt some of the rules from them. I mean, I already have. I've been doing it for a long time. I'll pull some stuff from them because, like I said, there's stuff in them that resonates with people. These beats do work, and it's like we talk about when you're trying to sell a book. People want to read something that makes them feel the same way as the other stuff they like made them feel. They want it to be different, but they want it to feel the same. So part of how you can make it different but the same is follow these popular beats so that all the characters are new, all the activities are new, the problems all new, but they follow a structure that the reader understands and appreciates. So if you got a genre appropriate structure to your genre appropriate story, and like we said before, there's still within every limit, it's fractal all the way down. There's an infinite number of ways to be creative within that.
I love that you brought up fractal.
Some people are gonna use these very well. Some people are it's not gonna work for them at all. But there's something to be learned from them.
I love that you brought up fractal because the next one is a fractal thing, and it's my favorite of the bunch. I really learned a lot from this, and it's called the snowflake method.
Right.
And it starts with the very basics of the story. You got a triangle usually, and you just go, what happens and who is the guy? And so you should be able to write it in 3 sentences. And then you take each one and you make it more complicated and you fill in more and more, and it builds out like a fractal. And what I learned from this was storytelling. Oral storytelling. Oral storytellers have talked about this kind of thing a lot. And if you want to be an engaging conversationalist, it's a great skill to work on. That you say somebody says, oh, yeah, I really like old cars. You don't go, let me tell you a story about an old car that's 18 minutes long. They don't. You might spend 17 and a half minutes irritating that person. But if you go, I know a guy who has one of these Richmond 50 horse from the 1920, and they go, no kidding. Tell me more. How did they get that? Now they've asked you a question. So you answer the question, but you don't give them any more than that. You just go, right. He found it in a barn in Wisconsin. And they go, a barn? He found a Richmond in a barn? Did he restore it? And you go, yeah, he spent his whole life restoring it. He spent 20 years doing this thing. It's beautiful. He just sold at auction for $5 million. And they're like, $5 million? And they ask you more questions, right? So if you want to be an engaging conversationalist, you have to rein in your desire to be like, hey, I've got this whole cool story. You need to hear all of it. And just go, I know a cool story if you want to hear about it. And they go, yes, I do. Or they don't. And then you just leave it alone.
Counterpoint, how about if I stick with my storytelling method of telling half of story, going on 14 different tangents, forgetting the first story I was telling, and then ask them a question completely unrelated to any of the 15 things.
That's another method. You should write a book about it.
It's called
the Stemple method.
Telling stories with severe ADHD.
The Stemple method, and outline it just like the 27 chapters.
That's right.
Just but make it the Jeremy Bearimy looking thing.
It will be. Now the dot in the I is uncomfortable personal information you throw in if you feel like you're losing them.
This was right about the time when I had this big boil right on the inside of my thigh.
You know, I have 3 nipples. Anyway, back to the bananas, smoking them to get high. But back to the snowflake method. I like actually reading. I was just reading about lately. I don't think they called it this, but it definitely is the reverse snowflake method of blurb writing. Because I have no trouble writing novels. I have big trouble writing blurbs. But this was a whole method of like, look, write a 2,000 word summary of your book with all the major points. And then
Oh
it
yeah.
was all about taking stuff out until you were down to 3 sentences, describing
Yeah,
the book. And
that
it
is a
was it
good.
was like really useful. It was, I think it was for like an elevator pitch, but it would work for blurbs as well. So it's almost the reverse Snowflake. You're starting with everything and
Right.
paring it down.
There are a few people who've written about literally writing all their novels using the snowflake method. They don't
Mhm.
ever sit down to write a thing. They write the basics, and then they expand each piece, and as they keep expanding, they eventually fill in so much, and they go, cool, the book's done. And they don't ever do a linear, hardly ever do a linear thing. I'm not sure I could do that, but I can see how you could write a really detailed outline that way. And I have a
Mhm.
really detailed outline that I wrote that way.
It's kind of how it is kind of how you can write as a pantser or a gardener, as they say, is because you're starting with an idea and then you're writing about that, and in that writing you come up with other questions, and then you choose to answer one and you go that way. But this question's still lingering, so you got to come back to that point. Sometimes that's how you get a subplot, or sometimes you prune that on the rewrite. You go, okay, we got to, that didn't pan out. So a lot of times when we talk about problems being solved and this and that, I've been writing a book and I come up with I'll have the big problem and I'll have a solution to that problem, but I know it's too soon. So I'm like, okay, how can my bad guy wreck this solution? Or
Mhm.
I need to find another solution that he can wreck, so that you get this loop of fixing problems, or you get that plot point two from the 3 act plot structure where they thought they had it, they don't have it. Because sometimes you can be writing a novel and you're like, I've solved it. I'm 10,000 words in. This is bad.
Yeah, it's not going to work. That's not going to work
No.
out.
So then you have to look at it from the other side. How can my villain foil this solving?
Right. And then
Or
you just
how
have
can
to and then you just have to be Blaze Ward and figure out how many of these
Yep,
you
yep.
need.
Or the other thing is I've also done is how does solving this create a bigger problem? Or how do we discover that this problem was bigger than we thought, or it wasn't the real problem? You've solved a symptom.
Yeah,
And
and I think that kind of problem solving is the fun stuff. I love that stuff.
mhm.
That's why my novels have intricate plots, because I'm having so much fun solving and creating problems.
Yep.
That's really a good time.
And for me, the difference between plotting and pantsing, or outlining and free writing, is just a matter of when and how you solve these problems. I mean, are you solving them while you're writing, or are you solving them while you're outlining? There's going to be creative problem solving no matter where it happens. And like I said, I often will skip over sections, or just write a little outline point. If I'm having trouble with a section, I'll just write okay, this happens, and move on. Or I will stop the writing, and because it's easier to solve problems when you're also not when you don't have to write full sentences about them. You know what I mean? You don't
Yeah.
have to concentrate both on the beauty of the prose and also figuring out what the hell's going on. So sometimes, I will stop and go, okay, I need a day or two just to think about this, plot it out a little, and then restart. But sometimes it's just flowing. And when it's just flowing, man, that's great.
It's so much fun to be able to put yourself in all these different characters' heads and solve all these problems. That's just really interesting. I wrote a scene the other day that I was super happy with, where the guy he wants to convince the police, who eventually are going to investigate this murder scene, that the guy who was killed was dealing meth, and he was killed in a bad meth deal. And he's really clever, this guy. So he shoots the guy, takes all the stuff out of his backpack that creates a little scene that looks like a meth deal gone bad. He takes a tiny little baggie of meth. He grabs the Cheerios off of the refrigerator, shakes them all out in the sink, pulls the bag to the side, and slips one little baggie of meth down in there, and throws the bag down, throws the box down. So that when they show up and they find the scale and a little meth dust and some other stuff, and sure, that looks like a setup scene or it could be the real deal. But when they find that baggie stuck back in there, they go, oh, he was keeping them in here and one of them slipped down the side. And it's like, who would plant that? So that's why he plants it there. And then when the police show up, they believe exactly that. And so now I'm in the, you know, be able to put myself in the head of this murderer vigilante who's, you know, trying to create this thing. And it allows you to do things you could never do. You know, I'm never going to be in that situation.
Never going to kill someone and set them up for, well, not now for sure.
Yeah. I mean, not that was way. I've given
that was the opening of my creepy story was in first person talking about how, you know, what if you could kill someone and get away with it forever? Well, first of all, you wouldn't talk about it in the first person. And then I proceeded with the third person story of this, how to get away with it every time without any problem.
Yeah, that's the real fun of this whole thing. So, are there other story structures that you want to talk about the hero's journey and how that works? It's a thing I know you've read a lot about.
Honestly, it's just another story structure. It's outlining the same stuff. Like I said, what I like about it is it does concentrate on several points of definite protagonist transformation. It's written into the thing. It's not just character overcomes problem. It's character survives ordeal or overcomes ordeal and is transformed by the process. They experience a spiritual or physical death and rebirth. And this happens twice in it. And there's some adjustments you can make. And like I said, I've written so much about this, especially as a fantasy writer. I am always searching for ways to give my writing resonance. I always tell people, look, you're making up words in fantasy often. So when I say the word home to the reader or to the listener, they're not just thinking of the dictionary definition of a domicile where the said person resides. Okay. They're thinking about their home. They're thinking about the people in it, the emotion that they feel when they're there, good or bad, their childhood home, their home now, what home they'd like to have. It resonates on so many different axes. All right. So now I'm trying with made up words and secondary worlds, entire cultures, societies, settings that I've created. I'm trying to make those resonate in that same way. And that is very difficult. So one of the ways I do that is to look to these old myths, these things that have stood the test of time, that have resonated with people for literally millennia, and follow some of those structures, use some of those archetypes to get the stuff that I'm writing to resonate. So anytime all the time, and I do it from the broad character points and plot points and setting points and all the way down to individual word choices and word combinations to get them to resonate on more than just the literal axis. I want them to resonate on a bunch of different stuff, and that adds depth to the writing. And it's an esoterical point. I'm not explaining it as well as I could, but I've written some articles for the site. I've written articles for my newsletter, for a bunch of different places that talk about it. It's one of my favorite subjects.
I think it's a very interesting point to consider how the word impacts your reader. And it's one of those things that when I'm putting together sentences and trying to create a prose that fits the theme or the feel of the book or the voice of the book, that's one of the things I do fairly naturally, and I don't think about it very much. And I'll go through some other people's writing, and sometimes I'll be critiquing something, and that's one of the things that I find myself going after. What you used here was just a word that no one cares about. You told us what happened, but we don't care about it because you didn't use words that were interesting. You know, if you just say he went back to his house, he went back down the street to his house. Okay, well, now we know what happened. But if you continue in that vein for a paragraph or two, we check out because we don't care anymore. You've got to be more interesting than that. You've got to use words that are better than just those
Was he
words.
trudging? Was he skipping? Was he walking? Was it raining? What did it smell
How
like?
did it smell?
What's his house like? Does he like going home? I mean, there's a lot of questions that are unanswered with he went back to his house. Why was he gone in the first place?
Yeah. Was it a house or was it a mansion or was it a cabin?
As far as individual word choice, I've been thinking about that for so long because I'm a songwriter and a poet as well. And in those forms, it's all about word choice. They're short forms. You need every word to do at least double duty. You know what I mean? You can't waste a syllable or three syllables, good for God's sakes, on something that doesn't resonate on more than one axis. That's why imagery is so important. And, because you need this small piece of writing to do more than just say something. It needs to really expand in your readers' minds.
I had a songwriting
and I try
teacher.
and take that over into long form as well.
Like 30 years ago, I had a songwriting teacher at a community college who was a brilliant guy. And we all had to write a song and a couple of weeks in we had to play the song. And one of my lines was it was about how if anyone gets hungry, they'll steal. And it was about a man asking for just a little change. And was he asking for change? Give me some nickels. Was he asking for things to be different? And his name was Johnny. He was a jazz guitar player that taught the class. And he said, I love that you did that. Why don't you do that in every line?
Yeah.
Find a way to use a word that means two things in every single line of that song. Because that's what you only have so many words and you better make them all count. And if you can make some of them work twice, that's amazing. And people love that stuff. And the people who don't catch it, it doesn't matter. But the people who do it will mean something to them. And so I've kind of been thinking about that ever since. For 30 years, that one thing that he said really has meant a lot to me.
We were critiquing a poem that a lovely poem that person in my writers group wrote just last Thursday, and Kelly Barnhill said something. She said in the group, she says every line of a poem has to justify its own existence. And two of the lines, she's like, look, these first four lines are all basically saying the same thing. So why are there four lines instead of one? And I had been my only comment on the poem, which I loved. I said, but it needed a stronger opening. I didn't know what was wrong with the opening, but it just wasn't doing. The rest of the poem was fantastic, and I didn't think the opening was good enough for the rest. It didn't signal that the rest of the poem was going to be so good. You know what I mean? And poems get skipped if those first couple lines don't grab something. And Kelly was actually able to articulate. And actually, once we cut the first two lines, it was an amazingly strong beginning. And sometimes, because those first two lines didn't justify their own, even though it was getting into the voice anyway. But just word choice, from choice of word all the way to story structure of a whole big thing. There's no detail that isn't worth overthinking at least a little bit. And Blaze will tell us we're wrong. Just write it and get it out the door, you dumb motherfucker.
That's right. I just started,
and he's not wrong either.
Right. I just started Blaze wording a book just in the last week. I started writing a comedy thing, and Blaze made the really good point he made for me was you're already doing it. You already tell me you write good copy for these magazines. What? And it's like, why didn't I think of that?
Right.
Why didn't it occur to me that that's a thing I already do and I can do this? And so I started doing this, and now I'm like, 30,000 words into this comedy thing that I started writing a week ago. And when I'm done writing it, I'm going to send it to beta readers because it's going to be ready. I'm not going to do it in, I'm not going to write it in a week like Blaze, but, it'll be a lot faster than if I was having to edit it 6 times.
And here's the thing. I will probably never do that. And not because I'm incapable of it, but because it doesn't interest me. And that's not wrong either. And will I make less money? Yes. but I have, there's no wrong reason to write, and yes, I do monetize everything I do because I've been freelancing since the age of 17, you know, so, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to try and turn myself into something that I'm not. That is not a way of writing that appeals to me. I enjoy rewriting and digging in and going on these weird sidetracks. And I like writing short stories and poetry, which are never going to make me any money, but it keeps me satisfied in a way that making more money uh, for work that I haven't polished to the degree I like to, because it's entirely a personal preference. I won't gain the satisfaction that and I do this to be satisfied as a person.
Yeah,
You know, and,
you
and
have to
if
strike some sort of balance there.
yeah,
When I first started learning about self-publishing, I knew some people who wrote romance and made a lot of money doing it. And I thought, could I do that? And I went and I read some romance, tried to read some romance, failed, couldn't. I was like, no, I just can't. I can't do this. If I had started, this was probably 7 or 8 years ago. If I had started cranking out 10 romance books a year, 7 or 8 years ago, I had enough writing chops to be successful at that and enough knowledge about self-publishing that I've amassed that I would probably be making real money by now. I just can't. I just can't do it. But I can um, put out things that I don't think are brilliant. I can write stuff that is good and that is what people want to read and that will sell, you know.
well, the other thing is, I think you're a brilliant comedy writer. So the fact that you're writing comedic stuff very quickly, I think will go very well for you. The stuff I enjoy writing involves a great deal of world building and intense historical world building, where the readers expect a depth to it that I don't think I can accomplish to my satisfaction without taking a great deal of time and without going through over and over it and making sure all those things make sense, even though they're at a second or third level that the book would easily survive a surface read without that kind of work. But I mean, literally, also I have much to my displeasure, I suppose. Money has never been a prime motivator for me.
Much
So
to your
I'm
wife's
more
displeasure.
yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, I'm much happier making just enough doing the kind of work that I like to do than I would be doing the kind of work I don't like to do for more money.
I think
And that's
that's something you and I bonded over pretty quickly is that we've never been willing to do something we hate to make more money. We just
yeah.
neither one of us is going to sit in a cubicle. It's
But
just
also,
not going to happen.
but also one of the things I really like to do is teach. Teaching and coaching have been a great love of mine. Whether it's poker or soccer or writing or music, it is a great love of mine to pass on knowledge, and it helps me, and I gain knowledge while doing it. So, I mean, I can very easily. I mean, me with poker, I was a far better teacher than I ever was a player because, frankly, I loved the teaching more than the playing. You know what I mean?
I'm starting to believe I've turned that corner myself.
That it happens.
I'm coaching a number of students right now who are playing nosebleed stakes. They're playing for amounts of money that some people don't believe exist in the poker world.
Mhm.
And I've got like a consistent student who's doing 2 to 4 hours a week who's playing 150, 300, and he's like, that's quite a bit smaller than these other guys are playing. Um, and then I go play a 20-40 game and I make like 7 dumb mistakes in an hour, and I think, what am I doing here?
What am I
Like
doing?
I would tell me if I were my student to just not play poker anymore if I was playing this
You're
bad. What am I
terrible at
doing?
it. Yeah.
I'm making people drastically better, but at this point I don't love the game enough playing it, and I love it. I love teaching it so much more. You know,
And that's the other thing about a lot of these pursuits. I tell people, whether I'm teaching music or I've written the same article for writing music, and poker. And it's called How to Quit Your Day Job and Play Poker or Play Music or Write Full Time. And my first line is always the first secret is don't quit your day job. If you have a day job that you enjoy and makes you steady money, stick with that and do the other thing as a hobby, because all three of these things generally generally are better as a hobby. The amount of dedication and love for the work that you need to make it at any of these things preclude some sensible decisions in other parts of your life.
Yeah.
But
I have cost myself a lot of money by telling people you shouldn't be trying to play poker for a living. You should make a side hustle and have fun with it. And they go, no. I have like 10 grand and we can do lessons for a year and really hit this hard. And I go, I mean, we can do that if you want. But your job pays you really well, and it's a dumb thing to do. You shouldn't do this.
what I'm really saying is that you have to love it, because if you're smart enough and talented enough to make it in any of these things, you're smart enough and talented enough to make more money doing something much easier. So you have to love it. You have to love the process of it. You have to love working at it. You have to love doing it. That's the other thing about Blaze. I mean, it's very clear he just absolutely loves writing.
Yeah.
And he does it a specific way so that he can continue writing full time. I mean, he is absolutely the man doesn't watch TV. Okay. I mean, he absolutely, I don't know if you've watched TV, but it's awesome. It's amazing.
If you find the right TV, it's certainly quite good. Yeah.
So, I mean, he absolutely loves it. So it's not like he's doing less of a job writing. He's just writing quickly and writing fast and writing all the time so that he can write all the time. And that's the other reason why it's difficult. It's why I can't adjust fully to that thing, to do it that way, because the way I love writing is different than that. And it's not wrong. It's just different. Blaze, me, you, all the writers we know, every way they do it is different, and it's 100% correct for them. But there are adjustments you can make. Talking with Blaze, some of the adjustments I've made, I have gotten quicker. I've gone from a novel every 3 years to 2.5, basically, novels a year. Okay, that's a huge uptick in speed.
Yeah.
For me. And and I'm going to try to get a little more, but I don't think I will ever probably get more than 4 novels in a year. Okay. That's just not the way I'm wired. But one of the things, what Blaze said to me, well, if you can't put out a bunch, put them out steadily at the same time. So your readers become accustomed to when your stuff is coming out, and they'll be like, oh, it's April. The new Stemple book should be dropping soon. And they'll be looking for it. Now, you're probably laughing because you know me, and I have just fucking wildly unmedicated ADHD. So I probably won't do that either. But but that is an adjustment that one could make to increase sales, despite being on a slower schedule than a lot of other independent writers. But so there's always adjustments you can make, but it's always easier to adjust the details of how you're doing your core work than it is to change your core self. I remember watching that thing by Rebecca Syme. I'm screwing up her name, but she was talking about you can change every piece of your personality. It has been scientifically proven that with time and effort, you can change every piece of yourself. So I could conceivably change into someone who wrote, 40 books a year. However, the time and effort it would take would not be worth it, because it would literally be a 10-year project, with countless, deep dives into my psyche, and just absolutely
nobody wants to go there.
Creating, so by the time it was over, I would have at 4 books a year, I would have written those 40 books. So So you adjust the edges, you refine your process to be better and more efficient. And there's so many ways to do that. And to bring it all the way back around, some of that might be story structures.
Well, look at you rambling for 20 minutes and then wrapping it up right at the end. Is he going to get there? He's so far out on a limb. Is he going to get back to the tonic?
Nailed the landing.
He made it.
Thank you. Bowing to the judges. Duck the landing. They didn't think they could do it.
We were talking about
the triple tangential twist with a half pike. There's no way. Oh, he stuck the landing.
We were talking about enjoying it and how much you have to love it, and that was the thing I really learned this last week in Arizona. The place I was staying, the much nicer background I had for the last episode, staying with family there, and the guy that owns the house there does very well for himself, and he's 70 something, and he works constantly. He's one of those guys that just he wouldn't retire. Why would he retire? He's having so much fun.
There's a great phrase for that. He'll die in the traces.
Yeah, he will happily, and he has fun with it all the time. And I told him when we left, that I learned a lot from you. We went out a couple days. He was like buying and selling some old cars and stuff, and I went out with him, and it was super fun. He just had fun the whole time, and that was such an interesting thing to learn from someone who works so much, who's a real type A workaholic, who's made money, who's accomplished a bunch of cool things, and owns a bunch of cool things, and it's really because he's figured out not how to work all the time, but how to enjoy working all the time, and he's made work fun. That same lesson I learned down in Costa Rica when I went down there with the company, and what they did was bring in lunch, run you in with a chauffeur, have a chef at the house, have a 20-person hot tub with a keg of beer. We were all together, 17 hours a day, and sleeping the other, however many we managed to get, and we were talking work the whole time, and we were only at work like 5 or 6 hours a day, and I thought, well, I'm really getting one over on these guys, and then I realized I'm talking work from the moment
just worked
a
17-hour day for these fuckers.
Damn it.
They paid me for 5. That's brilliant. Well played, fellas.
The chef was an amazing investment because we never went out to dinner. I never went out to dinner. We all stayed in the same place and ate around a big table and talked about work some more. It was an amazing investment.
I thought I worked 5 and they paid me for 8. Actually, I worked 17 and they paid me for 8.
And I was happy about it.
And I was thrilled, and I'd do it again. Yeah, it's funny. My mother wrote a book on writing, and it's called Take Joy. And a lot of it is about why would you write if you hate it? Whereas most of us, the joke is, do you hate writing or are you not a writer? But honestly, even the people who say that, they love writing. They wouldn't do it if they didn't. I mean,
they're not in it for the money.
Yeah. If you hate writing, why?
Although these days with self-publishing, some people are making enormous piles of money. So, but those are people who could make a bunch of money doing a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Much like poker, if you can make a living doing it, you could make twice as much money doing some other better thing.
The nice thing about writing as opposed to poker is you're highly unlikely to lose money, a lot of money in one night writing, which is
which happened to me one night in Arizona.
Well, it's not even a possibility in poker. You're definitely going to have giant losing nights.
Absolutely,
that's just the way it works. And if you can't handle that, oh boy, you're in for a rough ride.
Yeah. Writing never ruins my day.
Right.
That is the real upside to it. And maybe I'm just the dog has been beaten. I finally found somebody who doesn't just beat me as bad, and so I'm happy. But
that's definitely me. Yeah. That's definitely me because I moved over from music. So, the writing business seems, even the traditional publishing, it's absolutely trustworthy and above board compared to the music business, which is just the absolute worst.
Yeah. That's when Napster started and they talked about it being the end of the music business. My first comment was burn it all to the ground and build something better. It can't be worse. I mean, that was right at the time where I was trying to help people break into the music business and watching my friends getting screwed. And they would say, "Oh, what's going to happen with the record companies and the bands?" And I would say, "Well, if the bands make no money because of this, it's a break even for them."
Yeah.
So that if the record companies burn to the ground, great. Maybe the ashes will be worth something. It was so bad. It was horrible. I don't know if it's gotten any better, but it was horrible.
It's still terrible.
Yeah. Any business that people really want to be in,
it's bad.
Mostly take advantage of people to get there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I had a fun gig the other night.
You wanted to do this thing for an hour, right? And we never pull that off.
No, we're just a little bit over this time. Well, this was great though. I like talking story structures. I don't use them, but I enjoy talking about them and breaking down things according to that. And just remember, they are a lot of them. Once you start looking at a lot of different ones, you start seeing the similarities, and really that's where you want to concentrate on, where the similarities are between them, because those are the ones that most people are agreeing are the important points in your stories. In my entire trilogy on writing fantasy novels, all I really say for story structure is about you're usually going to want kind of a midpoint bump. Mid to 2/3 of the book, you should have led up to something, and then it's back down and then back up to the climax. Because if you just have a steady climb to the climax, it's usually not going to work. But other than that, that usually comes about organically anyway for me.
Yeah, talking story structure is always interesting, and the key, I think, for me, what would have made things a lot easier for me is to have the confidence to know these things are all useful, and you can also throw any of them out at any moment.
Yeah,
it took me a few years to learn that I don't have to do this stuff, but I can learn from it. And so go read about all these things, and then take that which is useful and toss the rest. The Bruce Lee quote: "Take that which is useful." That's what yeah.
Once you know that none of them are the secret, and that there is no secret, or there is a secret, it's sit down and write. That's the entire secret to success at writing. Oops, I gave away the secret for free. Is right. I mean,
we're building a website around that entire secret.
Yeah,
and here you are.
But I mean, but in addition to the but like I said, we're not teaching a story structure. We're or teaching you the secret. We're teaching you how to figure out what's going to work for you, to define your core writer, and to streamline all the other processes that are getting in your way. Get the tools and the advice and the information that you need to help you write the way you write, for the reason you want to write, and to make a little money at it, or maybe a lot of money, to figure out how to monetize, how to write better and monetize what you're writing. I mean, because I talk a lot about the craft, and I have never not tried to monetize every piece of artistic output I've made of any kind in my life. It has never occurred to me not to. A guy I followed the other day, he tweeted, "This year, I'm going to do a piece of art just for the art of it and not try to monetize it at all." And my comment was, wait, what? We can do that? Because it literally never occurs to me not to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an intrinsic part of it. You should always be writing for publication. That's the way I am. But again, that's not right either. My kid writes hundreds of thousands of words of fan fiction, and it's fantastic. They also write some stuff for publication, but they love and will never stop writing fanfic that gets given away for free, and they absolutely love it. And it's great, and it all counts. Why do you write? Why do you write, and how do you write? Those are the questions you need to answer.
This week's assignment: find a story, a show, a book series that you hate, and write fanfic for it and publish it and put it online somewhere.
Nice.
That's you want a challenging exercise? Go do that.
And figure out why people like that. What part of that resonates with people, and why doesn't it resonate with you? and there's no judgment on why what resonates with people and why it doesn't resonate with you, but figure it out. You can learn from stuff you hate. Like, we hate each other, yet we learn from each other every week.
It was 6 years before we said a nice thing to each other, and we were really good friends by that point.
I think it was 6 years, and you invited me to be best man at your wedding, and I thought, oh, we must be friends then.
No, not long before that, you had said a nice thing to me, and I was like, oh, wow, this is serious now. We're really friends. I better invite him to be the best man at my wedding. It was a very male bonding experience.
No other choices.
Where we insulted each other constantly for many years. Now we've said 3 nice things to each other. Best buds.
That's my son. One story, and then we'll call it. My son was talking about how much he hated this kid and my wife was like, no, you love him. Isn't he your best friend? And my son was like, yes, of course he's my best friend. And I freaking hate him. And she turns to me and she says, help me out here. I said, I feel like you have a fundamental misunderstanding of male friendship.
Yeah, my friend Tony and I, people thought we were going to fight all the time. And we just never said nice things to each other, and that was super fun. I got into his car once. His girlfriend had gotten in the back seat because it was a little car and I was a big guy. And I got in the passenger seat and there was a tape in the tape deck I did not like. And I pulled it out, looked at it and said, how much did you pay for this? And he said, $5. And I said, okay. And I flung it out the window on the highway, gave him $5. And his girlfriend said, after we got out, his girlfriend said, I don't think you guys really get along. It's weird. I thought you were friends. And I was like, no, we're super good friends. And she was like,
I wouldn't give an enemy $5. I'd just throw the tape out.
Yeah. I would have thrown it at him.
All right, buddy. Well, this was great.
That was fun. We'll talk next week. We'll figure out a topic for next week and have something planned.
Excellent.
Maybe.
Thank you for listening to the Written Well podcast, your source for anything and everything in the world of self-publishing.